All right, everybody set?
Yes.
Set and settled, ready? Okay. Anybody know where we left off? All right, well, where was that?
Acts 13.
All right, okay.
Church.
Okay, we are in Acts 13. Okay. I wanted to back up just to reemphasize one point before we go to where we actually left off. If you go back up and look at Acts 13, verse 12. Everybody got it?
Yes.
Acts 13:12. If you remember where we were with this one, this was after the sorcerer had been, yeah, he ended up being, just told off by Paul. I was trying to find a nice way to say it, but after that had occurred, the proconsul, in verse 12, I'm reading out NIV, when the proconsul saw, and who was the proconsul? Anybody remember? He was like the lieutenant governor, exactly. When he saw what had happened, he believed. And why did he believe? It's important that we notice this. For he was amazed at the teaching about the Lord. So it wasn't what had happened to the sorcerer, it wasn't the fact that he was blinded, it wasn't any of that. And this just shows us that any of the miracles or special things that are done for a purpose to be directed back to the Word. They're not items that stand alone on their own. So as we see things, because we're going to see more miracles as we go forward, because sometimes something needs to be done that's out of the ordinary to catch the attention. But it's only for that purpose of grabbing the attention, but to direct it back to the Word. So he believed because of the teaching of the Lord. Okay? So now we left off at 51, right? And there was an assignment.
Yes.
What was the assignment?
The assignment of what the shaking the dust off.
Okay. Anybody get a chance to look at that?
I did.
All right, so what do you have?
When you present yourself to someone and tell them the word, and they don't believe in what you're telling them, but you know the truth, and they reject you from it. They don't want to hear about it, but you have to not focus on what they're rejecting. You know what you know, and you just go on and tell somebody else that want to know about Jesus Christ or whatever you're presenting. You know the truth.
Okay, so that's the application of it, which is correct. That is the application, that you not be deterred. What is the actual reference? What's the meaning? Sylvia, what did you find?
I found that it's just like when today you said, I wash my hands of it, I'm done.
That's right.
And you did.
Okay, like I'm washing my hands of the situation. Okay, anybody else? Anybody find any references to other scriptures?
Yes.
Uh-oh. Is that my sound? That was me. Hold on one second. I'm not silent. Sorry about that. Okay. Anyone? All right. We're going to look at dust. There are actually 4 scriptures in the New Testament that deal with shaking off the dust. actually, well, 4 others with references to Jesus, and then we have this scripture here in Acts. So we're going to take a look at these, and we're going to take a look also at what they are referring to, because the things that happen in the New Testament are continuations of Jewish traditions for the most part that had happened before. Okay? Is that right or no? Yes, all right. So we've got Matthew 10:14. We got Mark 6:11. Luke 9:5, as well as 10:11. And then, of course, we have where we are today in Acts. All right, so get ready to flip. We're going to be flipping back and forth on these scriptures because we need to look at them. Because Paul is saying here what Jesus told his disciples. Remember, Paul had that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. We don't know all that he learned personally, all the things that were taught, but clearly whenever he's making a reference to something that Jesus said or did is because he knew it, first-hand experience. So let's go over to Matthew 10:14. Everybody there, Matthew 10:14? Yes. Okay, somebody want to read that? I want you to read 14 and 15, please. And just tell me what translation. What do you have?
I have the NIV.
NIV. Go ahead.
If anyone would not,
And we got to use outside voices.
if anyone will not welcome you to or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that home or town. I tell you the truth, it would be more unbearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town.
Okay. Put a pin in that. And let's go over and look at Mark 6:11. So this is Jesus speaking, right?
Yes.
And this is the context of this is when he was sending his disciples out. He was sending them out 2 by 2, and this is part of the instructions that he was giving them. All right, somebody got the Mark scripture?
King James Version.
Okay.
And whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear you, when you depart thence, shake off the dust under your feet, for a testimony against them. Verily I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city.
Okay. So before we go to the Luke, we need to talk about this Sodom and Gomorrah reference. Anybody remember what Sodom and Gomorrah, what that reference was? What happened to those cities?
They were destroyed.
They were destroyed, exactly. So the entire account of it, and it would be something that would be helpful if you wanted to read it sometime. You can find it in Genesis 19, if you want to read the whole account. But, you know, God put up with a lot of stuff. He still puts up with a lot of stuff from us, right?
Yes.
He is just so merciful and so kind. He puts up with much more than we'd ever put up with anybody else. And only twice that we see recorded, or that I found definitely recorded. Of course, we know the entire world was destroyed at one point with Noah and the ark. And then, in the terms of Sodom and Gomorrah, it was just so awful that God had to destroy them. And that was one where he destroyed with the fire, sulfur, and so forth. And it was a situation of Lot, so you can sort of connect these things. You probably already know them, but just so that you connect them. Because Lot was living in Sodom at the time. And he escaped with his family. And what happened to his wife?
She turned back.
He turned back, right. Because what the angels who had visited, there were two angels that came to visit them on that day, and the whole situation ensued. What they said was, all right, it's going down right about now. And you just need to go, you and your family, take everybody and get out, because no one can be saved here any longer. And as you go, just keep going and don't turn back. Now, Lot had already made a little bit of a bargain, because they told him to flee to the mountains. And he said, I can't go, I can't do it, I don't know whether physically he couldn't, it wasn't clear. But he said, let me just go over to this town. They said, okay, fine, that's the best you can do. Go over to the town, just go and don't look back. And we're told sometimes to go and not look back on certain situations, right? And they're supposed to be put in time. And if we had turned back, maybe we haven't been struck down, but we certainly have encountered some problems, right? So we got to, don't turn back on that one. So Jesus is giving this warning here to his disciples. And this is how serious it is. And he's saying, if they don't receive you, they are just lost. And don't worry about it. Like you were saying, Sylvia and Juanita, wash your hands of it. You have done the most that you could do for that situation. Now let's go over here and look at Luke. Luke 9:5.
I have the New Living.
Okay, New Living.
If the people of the village won't receive your message, when you enter it, shake off its dust from your feet as you leave. It is a sign that you have abandoned that village to its fate.
To its fate. All right, so they're going to be destroyed, and it's solely on them. The disciples do their job, and to its fate. Now let's go over one chapter to Luke 10:11.
You want me to read that?
It's someone else.
Okay.
Someone else. Luke 10:11.
NIV.
Okay.
Even the dust of your town that sticks to your feet, wipe off against you. Yet be sure of this, the kingdom of God is near.
All right. So we see that those are all examples of what Paul said. In this case here, when we're in Antioch, the city of Antioch. But I found some really good information, some good background that I want to share with you. Now, what was the primary means of transportation in those days? All right, one foot in front of the other. Okay, so now, there were roads, but the roads were made of primarily dirt. There were some cobblestone roads. The Romans were really good at going into territories and creating what they called highways, but the whole concept of paving just wasn't there, so it's still going to be dusty. And then the people wore sandals. This was part of their attire. And the sandals typically had wooden soles and were fastened with straps of leather. And the Jews did not wear sandals indoors. They removed them upon entering the house and washed their feet. So washing of the feet was a common practice. It was an act of hospitality, although it was usually done by the servants. So I want us to take a look at John 13, 5, 8. It'll be familiar as soon as you get this. John 13, 5, 8. 5 through 8. And actually, I'm going to start at verse 2. Everybody there?
Yep.
Yes.
So where are we? You see this. Where are we? All right. But this is the beginning, actually, of the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper. Right? The evening meal, I'm in verse 2. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. So this is the scene that is set, which means that they had evidently come into this room and no one's feet had been washed at this point in time. You know, maybe there was no servant or whatever the case may be, we don't know. But at verse 5, after that, now mind you how he's dressed, now he's got the towel around. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around them. So this was an act of humility and also an act of love. So the idea of someone washing your feet was common because they would come into the house. It was usually something that a servant would do. Jesus here does it for his disciples. He washes their feet because we've been talking about all this dust, right? And he is showing them the idea of being humble and being selfless and a servant, because that's what we are to be. But this is the same person that's telling them to shake off the dust of your feet. You see it? So he is modeling for them an example of what they should be doing in the washing, but what they don't have to put up with in the rejection. If there is rejection that comes about, you don't have to deal with that. You have presented the word. That's what I want you to do. I want you to be kind. I want you to be humble. I want you to be loving. But if you are rejected, go on about it. Move on about it. So now let's I like that one. Keep right on moving. Let's talk a little bit more about dust on this. It's symbolic of several things. First of all, man was created from the dust of the earth, right? Remember that over in Genesis 2. And to dust he will return in death. The serpent in Eden was punished by being sentenced to a diet of dust. And then people would cover themselves, in Jewish history, people would cover themselves with dust as a sign of mourning and repentance. It's also associated with poverty in some of the Psalms, you'll see that. But the interesting thing about the scripture in both Mark and Luke is that when Jesus tells them this, he talks about it being a testimony against them. And he's showing that it is the act of doing it is to declare them as all right, I'll get to it in a second. I'm sort of out of sequence, but it's to declare them as unclean, and we'll see that in just a moment. But that they have rejected the messages coming about. Now, In the Middle East, travelers would arrive often with their feet caked with dust. I'm reading from this article right now. Hence, the foot washing was traditional, but the Jews made this a theological and sacred issue. So it's like they took it beyond an act of hospitality that needed to be done because they needed their feet clean, and took it to a different level. And then they decided the Jewish customs and traditional teaching believed that any land outside of Israel was defiling or was just dirt. You can see that, right? The different things we've seen about them. Now, remember last week we looked at the spread when the persecution and how at Pentecost when the Jews from every place were there. You see how far they're spread all over, right? So this became a problem for the Jews who were not living in Palestine, in Jerusalem. You know, suddenly they're not living there, but it's been declared that every place else is unclean and dirt, so it became a problem. So then they said, okay, well, when you come to Jerusalem, because they had to come to Jerusalem, shake off any dust or dirt from outside lands. And if you happen to have with you any fruit or food, it's got to be clean. And the dust of a Gentile land was considered as if they came in contact with a corpse. You know, they took things to a whole other level, making it difficult even for themselves. So, you know, it was fine when everybody lived in Palestine, when everybody living there in Jerusalem, but when the others were going other places, and they said to them, hey, it's time, it's for festivals, the feasts, the sacrifice, come on back. Oh, wait, you're coming back from someplace that wasn't clean. Oh, okay, let's figure out what can we do. Okay. So Jesus then is picking up on this attitude of how bad it was. Like it's as if you touched a corpse. So he's saying to his disciples, I give you permission to consider it like that. Because they are in fact dead if they have rejected the word. You see it on that one? They were dead to the kingdom, basically, is what he's saying. And that's why he also brings in Sodom and Gomorrah, because they have been judged from that perspective as well. Okay, so that's just a little bit things I found interesting about dust as we go forward. So remember I had said before that there are no words or terms that are just idly thrown about. There's some significance, there's some reason, even like a little word like dust, a little four-letter word like dust. Okay, so we're going to move on now, and we're going to go back to Acts 13, and because we're going to see Paul pick this up. Acts 13 and down to 51. Yes, Acts 13:51. Everybody got it?
Yes.
So in Acts 13:51, it's not so much telling, because in the other scriptures Jesus was giving that instruction to his disciples. He was telling them what to do. Here it's an action. Paul and Barnabas, right? So if we go back up, starting at 49. The word of the Lord spread through the whole region, but the Jewish leaders. We're going to see that over and over and over again. But the Jews, but the Jewish leaders incited, and you know I'm still dealing with this, that he had to go there and say the God-fearing women. I don't know why he had to go there, but that's what he said. That's what's in the word right here, okay? The God-fearing women of high standing and the leading men of the city. So you wonder, if they get stirred up, how God-fearing were they really? You know? I just wondered about that. I guess I was still trying to deal with him talking about the women.
Yeah.
And then they stirred up persecution against Paul and Barnabas and expelled them from the region. So they shook the dust of their feet as a warning to them and went on to Iconium. And the disciples were filled with joy and with the Holy Spirit. So the disciples, those traveling with Paul, but also those that were there, they were so happy to have received that word, right? Because they wanted them to come back, right? Remember that? Okay. So now we're going to continue on, and we're at Iconium. So if you're looking at your map, you're looking at the map, the one first missionary journey. All right, this one. Okay, so you got it? Paul's first missionary journey?
Yes.
Right, so the journey started at Antioch in Syria, over in the yellow area on the right side. That's where it started. And it's the blue line that we're following. Because they sailed from there and first landed on Cyprus in the town of Salamis. They went down to Paphos. Then they came up on land to Perga. See, you see Pamphylia in the yellow and Perga there. And then they went up further to the top of the green area right before the salmon color to Antioch and Pisidia. That's where we were. All right? So they're leaving there, shook the dust off their feet, and they're going down to Iconium. You see that? You see it? Okay. Now, Iconium is it's an important crossroads type of city. It was about 110 miles from Perga, where we just were. I'm sorry, we were not in Perga. Antioch was 110. Excuse me, Antioch was 110 miles from Perga. Forgive me on that one. Iconium. Do I have the distance? It was some distance away. All right. It was some distance away. I don't know what it was. From Antioch. But it was an important crossroads in the area. It's a little difficult to see, but if you notice, there's a mountain range. Do you see like the little peaks and all? Okay. And then above it, it's kind of smooth. So where Iconium was like a crossroads for trade, because it was easy for them to travel from there. They could come in from Asia and go all the way through there over to Cilicia, to Tarsus, and so forth, without having to try to deal with the mountain to get down to the sea. So it became an important land trade route on there. It was also an agricultural center. That's what Iconium was. So let's look then and go over to chapter 14. And if someone would read just verses 1 and 2.
This is King James.
Okay,
And-
I'm going to ask, I want you to read this too, but I will ask going forward if we read a more modern translation, it's just a little bit easier for
I left
understanding.
my Bible home. I begged this one from downstairs.
Well, the word is the word, and it's still good. So I want to hear it there, but I also want to hear it after you've read those two verses. I want to hear it in a more modern one.
Okay. And it came to pass in Iconium that they went both together into the synagogue of the Jews, and so spake, that a great multitude both of the Jews and also of the Greeks believed. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and made their minds evil affected against the brethren.
Okay, so somebody give it, Juanita, what do you
New
have?
Living Translation.
Okay.
The same thing happened in Iconium. Paul and Barnabas went to the Jewish synagogues and preached with such power that a great number of both Jews and Greeks became believers. Some of the Jews, however, spurned God's message and poisoned the minds of the Gentiles against Paul and Barnabas.
Okay. Now, we had seen back in Acts 13 the example of Paul's message. It was his habit. Some of your translations said that Paul and Barnabas went as usual. It was their habit that whenever he came to a place, he would look for a synagogue first. And the majority of the places, as we set out on our journey, had a synagogue. When we get to the second journey, we'll find that he's getting to some places maybe a little further out where there is not a synagogue. But right now, there is one. So he always felt that I need to talk to the Jews first, because they had the word that came from God